Welcome to the Healing Migraines Naturally podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Leslie Caesar, and I am a licensed naturopathic doctor, former chronic migraine sufferer, and I help women all over the United States get rid of their chronic migraines, wean off of unwanted medication, and do it all without taking a fistful of supplements. So welcome to the podcast. Today we're going to answer the question, can I high vibe my way out of a migraine? So this episode was inspired because I was talking with a woman on a free consult call, and she's been listening to the podcast for several years, really since the beginning. And so she's heard me talk about the three principles, what I call the three principles, the three things that our body needs to restore itself back to health and then maintain its health. And the third principle is restoring our resiliency and vitality. So she's heard me talking about this over the years. And so when she heard the word vitality, she associated that with sort of like kind of a high vibe mindset, right? So she said, if I start to feel a migraine coming on, what I've been trying is like putting on like some upbeat music, trying to get my mood up, my vibe up, trying to get my energy up through music. I keep trying different ways of trying to get my energy up, my vibe up, and I really never notice anything, right? So I was like, you know what? I'm really glad you asked me this. Let me talk more about this on the podcast, okay? So when I talk about this third principle, this concept of resiliency and vitality, okay? It's not about sort of like manifesting feeling better, talking ourselves into feeling better, psyching ourselves up into feeling better, right? If that's all it took, nobody would ever feel bad, right? We would just kind of vibe our way, we would manifest our way, we would talk our way into feeling better. And then obviously, certainly, right, there's some truth to this, right? Many times we might feel that our mood is going down, we're catastrophizing something, we're overthinking something, we're kind of spiraling down. Oh, well, this was bad, and then this will be bad, and that'll be bad, right? And many times, if we become aware that we're doing this and we kind of pull our mind back a little bit, right? We exert a little bit of will over what our mind is doing and say, you know what? I'm really making too much of this. We can kind of pull our mind out of that, and we can definitely feel better, right? And so certainly, if we're having a migraine that's starting on sort of the mental and emotional side of us due to stress, and we realize we're kind of adding to our stress by our mental state, and many people have experienced, oh yeah, I don't think that migraine ever happened. I think I actually did avoid a migraine by exerting some will over my mind, right? So there is some truth to this, right? But what I mean by resiliency and vitality is a little bit different than this. Okay, so let me go into this a little bit more. We're going to dedicate this podcast episode to this. When I talk about resiliency and vitality, it relates to the organizing energy of the body. You might call it the life force of the body. In Chinese medicine, they call it the qi. In naturopathic medicine, we call it the vital force. So it's sort of the organizing life force of the body that keeps everything running smoothly, keeps the organism in homeostasis. Okay, so every living thing on the planet has this sort of life force, this organizing energy that coordinates the activity of all of the different parts of the body. So, we are a very, very complex organism. We have 30 to 40 trillion cells. So our physical body is very, very complicated. And then we have our mental and emotional component, which adds even more complication to the system. Okay, so within many forms of medicine, many schools of medicine, including naturopathic medicine, other schools of medicine like traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, the traditional medicine of India, homeopathy. Different schools of medicine have this concept of this organizing energy to the body that keeps all of these different parts running smoothly. And so what we call the vital force in naturopathic medicine, or the qi, the life force, this life force has to be strong enough to keep things in balance, right? So there's also sort of a strength component to the life force. So we can have sort of a low life force We can have a high life force. If our life force is sort of low, it's going to have a harder time keeping everything regulated. So before someone dies, the life force is very low, right? So there's a strength component to the vital force, to the life force, to the chi, to the organizing energy of the body. So you want your vitality to be stronger than the stressors that are affecting you. So I like to think of this as we have like a needle pointing north, okay? So we sort of have like this internal compass needle, and when our needle is pointing north, we are in the green zone, we're in a state of health, we feel good, our body is not generating symptoms, okay? But this needle is continuously getting pushed down by stressors, physical stressors, mental and emotional stressors. So physical stressors, a lot of times we don't think of physical stressors unless they're really, really big physical stressors. So like a big physical stressor would be like an accident. You get in a car accident. That would be a big physical stressor that's going to push that compass needle down. Or like getting the flu, right? I'm recording this in January 2026, and we're in the midst of a pretty severe flu season, right? So influenza is a pretty significant viral infection, and I say pretty significant in the fact that it generates a lot of stress on the needle. If it goes into bronchitis is another illness that is particularly physically stressful on the body, and it'll push that needle down. A lot of people will say, I've never felt well since I had that bronchitis or that walking pneumonia that one year, right? Because that particular illness is particularly stressful, and it pushes the needle down with quite a bit of force. So when we think of physical stressors, this is what most people think of. Or they might think of like exercise, right? I've been to the gym and I did a big, resistance training, and now I can't walk for 2 days, right? So I physically stress my body, right? But there are more subtle physical stressors that we don't really register as stress. So a barometric pressure change, that's a physical stressor on the body. Sunlight beating down on you, that's a physical stressor on the body. I'm listing 2 common migraine triggers, right? So what's happening is this needle, our bodies are being continuously by physical stressors all the time. Every sensory input on the body generates a physical stressor on the body. So we can have these big physical stressors like an accident, an injury, an illness. We can have these little tiny sensory impressions that we hardly register, but they're still stressors. Then you have, more medium level stressors like a workout or something like that. So those physical stressors are pushing the needle down. Then we have mental and emotional stressors, things that we call stress, right? So you've got a work deadline, you've got a conflict with a family member, you're nervous about giving a public speech or something like that, right? So mental and emotional stress also pushes that needle down. Now, what counters the needle is our resiliency and vitality. So we want to have our vitality as strong or stronger than the stressors that are pushing the needle down. And when our vitality is stronger than the stressors, our needle stays pointing north, and we will continue to feel good in the face of those stressors. If our vitality is weaker than the stressors, then our needle is going to go down. Hi there, it's Dr. Leslie. If you're a woman having 8 or more migraine days a month, let's talk. I'll show you how to drop them to near zero in 90 days. And that's without adding more medication. In fact, you can even lower or possibly even completely wean off of your medication within 90 days. And that's without any agonizing cold turkey withdrawals. So let me tell you about one of my clients, Judy. She was nearly bedridden because she was having to take such strong medications for her migraines, and she could barely function. In fact, she had to close the doors of her small retail business, and she was feeling like a failure. She wondered every day, why was she doomed to suffer from migraines? But just like you, she found this Healing Migraines Naturally podcast and a spark ignited. She knew that if she could just figure out why these migraines started in the first place, she could restore and recover her health again. So she booked her free consult call, and the rest is history. Now she reports months in between migraines and runs her small business full-time again. She followed the 12-week plan and got incredible results, and she's completely weaned off of all of those preventative medications that were leaving her feeling doped up and committing her to being bedridden. I have worked with women just like Judy from all over the United States overcome migraines naturally. So if you're serious about healing your migraines, then tap the link in the description and book a free consult call with me, just like Judy did. We do cap new clients monthly, so if the calendar's full, the doors are closed for now. So don't wait to reclaim the life you deserve to live. No matter how hopeless things seem now, with expert guidance, your body can heal and recover. So I look forward to chatting with you. Click the link now to schedule your call. And on that compass dial, we all have zones of symptoms that we're prone to. Okay, so if you're listening to this podcast, I'm going to assume that you and I have a zone on our needle, on our compass dial. You and I have a zone on our compass dial in common, and that zone is migraine. So when my needle gets pushed into my migraine zone, I'm going to get a migraine. Now, I have other symptoms that I'm prone to on this dial, just like you have other symptoms that you're prone to on this dial as well. But you and I have that zone in common. If our needle gets pushed into that zone, we're going to have a migraine. Now, how do I get these symptom zones on my needle, right? Well, this is largely genetic, right? It's been well documented for thousands of years, right? Even before we knew what the genome was, humans were observant and they realized that things were hereditary, right? So a large amount of what you are prone to, sort of what symptoms are on your compass dial, a lot of that is hereditary or genetic. But that doesn't mean that we have a death sentence, okay, that it's inevitable, right? I have migraines and headaches on both sides of my family, right? So it's not like, oh, there's nothing I can do about it. It's genetics, bad luck, missed the lottery here. My needle has to go into the zone in order for me to get a migraine. So while I may have that hereditary zone or that genetic zone, if my vitality is stronger than the stressors, then I won't go into the zone and I won't get a migraine, okay? So when I'm talking about our resiliency and vitality, as it relates to this third principle, we want to restore our resiliency and vitality. We want to increase the strength of the life force, the vital force, the chi, right? We don't have a name for this culturally because this is not a concept that is really part of our culture. But if you look at how other cultures have looked at health and disease, and if you observe life on Earth, you realize, this is a concept that's important. It's an important concept that we are currently missing. And unfortunately, you can judge the tree by the fruit, right? Because we are living in a society where most people are not feeling well and they're not in a state of health. They may not be experiencing migraines, but they're suffering with symptoms, okay? So you can tell just by the fact that we have a chronic disease crisis in America that we do not have the proper conception of health and disease. But I won't go down that rabbit hole, okay? I'll save that soapbox for another podcast. This is sort of the concept that I want you to think about, okay? So to restore our health and stop getting migraines, we have to increase that vitality. So I like to think of, it's sort of like we have a vitality bucket, right? So we want to fill that bucket up. If you're struggling with chronic migraines, if you're spending half the month with some head pain and other migraine symptoms, your bucket is low, okay? Your needle is sort of always hovering around that migraine zone, and any little thing is pushing it in there, right? Any little barometric pressure change, any little increase in the sunlight you're exposed to. a food that you're not breaking down very well, not digesting properly. All these little stressors are enough to put you right in that migraine zone, and you're tipping in there multiple times a week. So we have to restore, we got to fill up that bucket. Okay? So how do we fill up the bucket? So first of all, let me talk about how does the bucket get drained? Okay? I like to think of this like we get a hole in the bucket, right? So we're trying to fill the bucket up. We're trying to increase our vitality. But if we've got a hole in the bottom of that bucket, we're never going to be able to fill up that bucket. How do we get a hole in the bottom of the bucket? When we live outside of the parameters that promote human flourishing, we are going to drain our vitality. Okay, so let me give you a couple examples here, because again, this is not a concept that we have culturally. The dominant medical model in our country, in our culture, is allopathic medicine. And in allopathic medicine, you get sick basically because you're unlucky. Okay, that's really the underlying theory of disease in allopathic medicine. You're just unlucky, stuff happens, now you're suffering, right? Now everything is blamed on genetics, but genetics is just a fancy way, or, scientific way of saying you're unlucky, okay? So all life on the planet has an environment that it's going to flourish in, and it has other environments. If it's not in that environment, it's not going to flourish, right? So, if you plant hostas in the full sun, they're not going to look as nice if you plant them in the shade, right? There are plants that are going to be in a better state of health if they're in the full sun, if they're in the shade, if they're in the, if they get the morning sun, right? There are plants that will thrive or die depending on the climate, right? So I live in the Chicago area. I lived in Phoenix for 9 years. Totally different climate. There's the plants that are living in Phoenix are not the plants that are living in Chicago, right? It's an unrecognizable landscape basically because the climate is so different, and the plants that flourish in those two climates are very, very different, right? So, we had some bougainvillea bushes in Phoenix. I love those, right? You see them all over the place. If I plant them in my yard here in the Chicago suburbs, they're not going to make it through the winter, okay? They're not going to thrive. And, it doesn't matter what my intentions are. I could have the best of intentions. I could be the biggest fan of bougainvilleas. I could perform incantations over the bougainvillea, right? I could, do all kinds of things to try to get that bougainvillea to flourish in the Chicago suburbs, and it's not going to survive, right? So we can see, right, with plants, there are certain environments that they are going to thrive in, and there are other environments that they're not going to thrive in. With animals, right? So my neighborhood here it's infested with skunks, okay? So it's an older neighborhood. The homes were built about 50 years ago. So most of us, right, we've got these old stoops and stuff like that, and the animals over the past 50 years have burrowed under these stoops. So if you go walking in my neighborhood at dusk, which I love to walk at dusk, you're going to run into skunks because they are diurnal animals. They come out at dawn. Probably a lot more people like to walk at dusk than at dawn. But in my neighborhood, if you're out at dusk, you are going to run into skunks because that's the natural law, the natural rhythms that govern skunks. They come out at night, at dusk, to eat their grubs or, whatever they eat. And the skunk cannot exert control over that, right? The skunk can't say, you know what, I think I'm going to go against the grain here. I'm really tired of this lifestyle, right? I think it's really unfair that we can only enjoy the planet at dusk and dawn. And so I'm going to get up at 2 p.m. and I'm going to come out of my little den and I'm going to look for my grubs at 2 p.m., right? A skunk cannot do that. If you see a skunk walking around at 2 p.m., that is a sick skunk. That skunk has rabies or distemper. That skunk has a big problem, right? So the skunk walking around at 2 p.m., that skunk has a symptom. That 2 p.m. wake up, that's a symptom, right? That's a symptom of something that skunk is not in a state of health. Okay. So animals, right? We can see this with animals. Some animals are nocturnal. Some animals are awake during the day. Some animals are here in the summer and they go someplace else in the winter, right? So you can see that there are natural laws, there are environments that animals will flourish in or they will suffer in. All right, so now let's look at humans. So we humans, we are highly adaptable. We are very, very unique. So we can live in a spectacularly diverse set of environments, right? We can live from the Arctic to the equator. We can live at sea level. We can live in the mountains. We can eat seal blubber. We can eat a mostly vegetarian diet, right? We can adapt and thrive in so many different environments, but there are limits, okay? Now, we like to think that we are in charge, right? This is the oldest story ever told. We humans, we like to think that we are gods and we get to set the rules, right? So we can, right? So humans are not nocturnal animals. The natural rhythms or the natural laws that govern human flourishing, we do our best when we wake up around the time that the sun rises. And that light hitting the retina in the morning sets off multiple hormonal cascades that contribute to our proper functioning and our flourishing. Okay, I'm not going to go into great detail into it, but that early morning light hitting the retina at that time around dawn, that's a very important factor for our flourishing, for our health. I can choose to stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning playing video games and sleep in until noon, right? And so by that time, I'm not getting that dawn sunlight hitting my retina. I'm getting that full-blown midday sun, right? And so I'm choosing to go against what is the best environment for human flourishing. Okay, so while there are certain parameters and environments, there are certain boundaries. As adaptable as we are, there are certain boundaries that are going to promote our flourishing or promote suffering. Okay, so if you see a human awake at 2 in the morning, you don't know if it's a symptom or not, because some people have the symptom of insomnia and they can't fall asleep. They may want to fall asleep at 10 p.m. so that they can get up around 6 in the morning and be, up and at 'em, get to work and feel good, start the day, right? But they can't fall asleep. They're laying in bed until 2 in the morning. Right? So with humans, it's not like a skunk, right? If you see a skunk, 2 p.m., they're awake, walking around the neighborhood, we got a problem, right? But with a human, they may be in the habit of staying up late. It may be a conscious choice, or it might be a symptom. And so this is where you have to have discernment to understand what's going on, particularly if you're a practitioner like myself that's helping somebody get back into a state of health. So, just to continue on with this example, a lot of practitioners, if they see somebody that's up at 2 in the morning, they say, well, you're staying up too late. We got to get you to bed at around 10, right? We got to reset sleep hygiene, start going to bed earlier, right? Reset your clock, right? So if you're up at 2 in the morning, sort of by choice, you can implement those things. You can change your habits and reset your clock and bring yourself back into alignment with the natural law or the natural rhythms that govern human flourishing. But if it's a symptom, you're not going to be able to do that, right? There's an underlying reason why your body is keeping you up until 2 in the morning, and just changing your habits, your sleep hygiene, the sleep routine, all of these other things, it's not going to be enough to bring you back into balance. So with us humans, when we are not in alignment, when we are going against the natural rhythms, the natural law, the environment that's conducive for human health and human flourishing, that generates a hole in the bottom of our vitality bucket, and it drains our vitality. So we can be draining our vitality because we've gotten in a bad habit of staying up until 2 in the morning, or we can have symptoms that also drain our vitality. And insomnia is, unfortunately, one of those symptoms, right? So it's a symptom that's being generated because there are missing pieces or blockers within all 3 principles, right? I'm just focusing on the 3rd principle in this podcast, but there are 2 other principles or things that our body needs to function properly, to be in a state of health so that we don't have symptoms, right? So when somebody has insomnia, there are missing pieces or blockers within all 3 of these principles. But unfortunately, insomnia happens to be a symptom because it pulls us out of the environment that's conducive for human flourishing. It also drains our vitality. And there are other symptoms like this, that they're not only a symptom, but they generate a hole in our vitality bucket. Anxiety is another symptom that also drains our vitality. And I'm going to be talking about that on another upcoming podcast. We've got that slotted. So again, let me recap. So while we humans can flourish in a wide variety of environments, which is wonderful, there are boundaries, there are parameters, there are hard stops where if we cross them, we are now out of alignment with the natural law or the natural rhythms or the natural environment that's conducive for our health, and that drains our vitality. Okay, so unfortunately, this can create sort of like a snowball effect. Okay, so part of the healing process, we want to plug up the holes in the bottom of the vitality bucket. So this is where we can take a look at our habits. So do I have any habits that are bringing me out of alignment and generating a hole in this bucket? And then, with any habit, you have to exert some will. You have to have motivation, and you have to exert a little bit of will. And many times you kind of have to have a strategy because, maybe it was really fun staying up until 2 in the morning playing video games. And maybe you were online with friends and so on, and it was like your social outlet. And so, okay, yeah, I know, oh, now I'm not feeling well because I stayed up until 2 in the morning for, 6 months playing video games. And I know I really need to change because I'm not feeling well. But, this is my social life, right? So, it's very easy to say we're going to change a habit. But even to change a habit, many times we have to look at, okay, what was this habit that was kind of out of alignment? What was the benefit to me of this? Or how can I meet that need in a more health promoting way, or in a way that's more in alignment with human flourishing, in a way that's not going to drain me, right? So, it's easy to say change your habits, but many times, right, there's a lot that goes into that. So we can look at the habits that we have. I'm using sleep sort of as an example, but we have a lot of other habits that can contribute to this. And there are natural therapeutics that will add vitality to the bucket, so we can use those too as we're kind of plugging up the holes. We can use some natural therapies or remedies to add vitality to the bucket. That can be nice for people. But I want to talk about the mental and emotional component to this, okay? Because we can also generate holes in the bottom of our vitality bucket that are coming from the mental and emotional side of us. And this also is the case for just about all of us. So if we're just going to look at the habits, which is important, if we're just going to use some natural therapies that add vitality, that's great. But we usually have other holes in the bottom of the vitality bucket that are starting on the mental and emotional side. So I want to give you an example of this. So, because I was thinking about how to explain this, and something from sort of my past life before I became a naturopathic doctor came to mind. So I'm going to share this with you. So I had a previous career before I was a naturopathic doctor. I worked in training and development, and I was an instructional designer and a classroom trainer and project manager, and I worked in a corporate setting. And so I had a coworker who was extraordinarily talented, one of the best instructional designers I've ever worked with. She was unbelievably creative, but she also really understood how to structure things so that adults could learn. So if you're not familiar with training and development, basically it's the people at work who make the training programs to train the employees how to do their job at work. Okay, so she was very, very talented at this, and she loved what she did, and she was very, very good. Really one of the top people I've ever worked with. And so we became friends at work in the way that you do become friends with coworkers. And so as we were getting, closer, and she felt more and more comfortable kind of talking with me and sharing with me, again, as you do, with coworkers, she would say something to me like, I worked on that presentation, and nobody really said anything after I did the presentation. I never really got any feedback on it. It seems like nobody really liked what I did. Nobody really liked my approach. I just feel like nobody really appreciated what I did with that proposal. And so I would be, shocked, right? Because I would have been in the meeting with her. I thought it was great. It was like, great proposal. Let's move forward, right? I thought we were moving forward. I thought we had consensus and that we were moving forward. But now she's telling me after the fact, no, people really didn't appreciate it, not on board, lackluster response. And so I was like, oh, okay. At first I was just like, yeah, oh boy, that's crazy. I thought it was great, right? So then, week later, I put together, such and such. I ran it by the stakeholders. I, stayed up really late working on it. I put a lot into it. And, I don't think they really liked it. I don't think they really appreciated what I did on this. And again, I was like, I'm shocked. Like, to me, it seemed like the exact thing we needed to do. I was very shocked. I was very sympathetic to her. As she continued to confide in me, she opened up more and more how hurt she was, how angry she was. She opened up more and more about how much time she was putting into things, how much effort she was putting into things, and she was never getting the recognition. She would talk about how other people were getting recognized, getting rewarded, getting the pat on the back, the mention in the team meeting, these types of things. And she was upset. And as her friend, I was getting upset too, right? Because to me, it seemed very unfair. I couldn't understand why nobody was recognizing her obvious talent and instincts. So again, as time continued here, then I started to realize that she actually was getting recognized. So I'm sure many of you work in these types of environments, right? It's end of year. You've got sort of like the holiday luncheon at a nice restaurant, and they give, kind of the end of the year recognition and so on. Well, here she's being called up to the front and getting recognized for all of her great work, and everybody's clapping and, and so on. This was not the impression that I had of the year, right? And so I started paying closer attention, and I started to realize that she actually was being recognized. Her ideas were being implemented. She was being given the lead on projects. She was really being listened to. And there was no reason for her not to be listened to or recognized, because she did fantastic work. Like I say, she was one of the best instructional designers I ever worked with. But what I realized was she could not see the reality of what was going on. And I realized that she continued to use language along the lines of, I'm not appreciated, I'm not appreciated. That type of language would be repeated frequently, maybe a little bit different word here or there, but that sort of overall tone was her recurring interpretation of how she was being treated. And what I realized was that this was really out of alignment with the reality of how she was being appreciated and recognized. So this caused her tremendous stress. And many of us, right, we are familiar with this concept, right, that we view the world through the glasses that we have on, right? And so I realized that my friend, who I really liked and really cared about, I started to think, I think she's viewing the world through these lenses that she's not appreciated. Even got to the point where she would share with me like a thank you card. Like she would get a thank you card from like a stakeholder. Thank you so much for your work on this. It was such a successful rollout, and we're seeing the results. Like someone took the time to write a thank you card in a corporate setting. Yeah, she just wrote a few lines here. Do you see this? It's just a few lines here. It's all the work that I did, and all I'm getting is a card. She just was not able to see the reality of the recognition and the appreciation, the rewards. She was getting bonuses, put on better and better projects, more and more responsibility, more and more interesting stuff, right? I'm not her therapist. I don't know the inner workings for her, but I think we can see that she was interpreting things through the lens of I'm not appreciated. So how would someone behave if they believe that they're not being appreciated at work and they desperately want to be appreciated, recognized, and acknowledged? What would be logical, right? So someone might start putting in a lot of overtime, right? Well, if they didn't like the presentation last week, I better do it even better this week. So that would be a pretty logical change in behavior or logical response that someone would have if they were craving, more than anything wanted to feel appreciated and recognized, but felt like they weren't being recognized. So they might start putting in a lot of overtime. They might start waking up in the middle of the night and start thinking about, okay, you know what? Okay, I got that option. Did I cross every T? Did I dot every I? Did I think of every contingency? I got to do this, right? They might start over-analyzing their interactions with other people, right? Because if I'm seeing everything through the lens that I'm not being appreciated, then, she said that to me, but was there a look in her eye? Was there, body language, right? She said that, but, what did I say back? Did I say the right thing back? Oh, I wish I had said this, right? Starting to kind of second guess responses or over analyzing things. So this is what we call stress, right? And in this situation, right, a lot of people, right, they're changing their behavior. They're having, thoughts and emotions related to this that are not congruent with the reality of the situation. And so this is going to be a vitality drain. This is going to put a hole in the bottom of their vitality bucket, and they're going to start draining their vitality. And even their behavior is going to, we can see it, obviously, right? If you're working 60 hours a week over and over and over again, if you're overanalyzing, perfectionism, right? When we're doing those things, we can even feel that we're draining our vitality, but we just can't stop, right? That desire to be appreciated is going to win out every time, and the sleep is going to be sacrificed. So this is how mental and emotional factors can generate that hole, drive our behavior that further drains our vitality, and now we're in a situation where our vitality is diminished. It's lowered. It's not as strong. Now, what needed to happen here with my friend, and I'm not her therapist, and I don't have any insight into what was underlying this, but what we want to get to the root of is, where did she pick up these glasses? That's really what we want to understand, okay? Because you can't just clean the glasses, okay? You can't just say, well, I'm going to try to just, I'm viewing things through these lenses that are kind of distorting things and making everything kind of blurry, but I'm just going to do my best. I'm going to just try to overcome that. If we've got a pair of glasses on that's distorting reality, we want a new pair of glasses, right? We don't want to just cope. We want to understand, how did I get these glasses in the first place? And in the vast majority of cases, we pick the glasses up in childhood as a result of childhood family dynamics. That's the case most of the time. We can pick up a pair of glasses, sort of a pair of glasses that's distorted in adulthood too. But the most likely area, the most likely time that we're going to pick this up is in childhood. So in order to patch up some of these holes in our vitality bucket, we have to look at some of these deeper underlying dynamics that are sort of putting these lenses on things that are distorting reality for us. Because again, when we're out of alignment with reality, we are going to drain our vitality. And that when we are out of alignment with the physical reality of sort of these rhythms or cycles, environments that are conducive to human flourishing and health, we're going to drain our vitality. And when we're out of alignment mentally and emotionally, we're going to drain our vitality as well. So this is why many of you haven't gotten results when you've gone to natural practitioners, because most natural practitioners are just working on what I call the first and second principle. Some practitioners are going to be more skilled than others as to how to work with you on the first principle and the second principle. Most practitioners don't understand migraines and how sensitive we are when we have chronic migraine, so a lot of practitioners will run into problems because of that lack of understanding. But the vast, vast majority of natural medicine practitioners are doing what I call first principle and second principle work to varying degrees of skill. But virtually no one is looking at this third principle and helping you identify where you have holes in that bucket, whether they be holes due to habits, whether there are holes due to symptoms, and whether there are holes due to these types of mental and emotional factors. And if you don't address those things, you're not going to feel better, because the first and second principle are basically giving your physical body what it needs so that the biochemistry works. That's kind of a high-level nutshell of the first and second principle. Nothing is going to run right in your body if your cells don't have the nutrients that they need to do their work. And the second principle is clearing the resulting metabolic waste material that your cells generate when they do their work and other toxin molecules or substances from the cells and from your body. Your cells aren't going to function properly if they don't have the nutrients that they need to do their work, and if there's a bunch of trash laying all over the place, things aren't going to go smoothly either. So the first and second principle are basically giving your body what it needs so that the biochemistry can actually do what it's supposed to do. But you have an organizing component, this organizing energy to the body that has to be in place also, and has to be strong enough to resist all of the stressors that are continuously trying to knock it out of balance, or literally knocking it out of balance. So if you're not working on that piece, you can get the biochemistry up and running, but you're still going to be continuously knocked out of health by stressors. Physical, mental, emotional stressors. So you have to have that resiliency and vitality restored, strengthened, rebuilt, so that it's strong enough to withstand the stressors that you're inevitably going to be exposed to. And there's multiple components that will put holes in that vitality bucket and drain your vitality, diminish the strength of your vitality. So I hope I explained this well. It's challenging for me to explain it because this is not a concept that we have culturally. We hardly have a language to talk about this. So I have been honing my language around this for many, many years now, and I'm trying to get this message out to people because this is one of the major reasons why people have not gotten results from natural medicine practitioners, because they're just, frankly, taking supplements, trying to get all these nutrients into their body, or trying to do a cleanse or a detox, right? Those are the top two things that a natural practitioner is going to do with you, and they're still not feeling better. This is why there's a third component, and there's a tremendous mental and emotional component to this as well. So for most of us, we have to do some work on this level, and we have to do some mental and emotional work as well. Otherwise, we're just going to keep draining our vitality, right? Unfortunately, like my friend clearly was doing. And, it's a real heartbreak because it's much easier for us to see this going on in somebody else, right? So, at first with my friend, I just took her at face value. I had no reason, she's telling me these things. Okay, yeah, it must be true, right? But over time, my own experience in the workplace, she and I worked together on the same team. We were in the same meetings. We had the same management, right? So because I was in reality and I could see things that were actually happening, I started to realize, okay, how she's looking at this is actually not in alignment with reality, right? But it's much easier for me to see that. I mean, it can be hard, right? If I were just like her friend that didn't work with her, and I was just like kind of getting together with her once a month for dinner or something, or coffee, and she was just kind of venting about her work, I would never have known. All right, I would be your friend, I would take her at face value. Oh my goodness, these people don't appreciate you, you need to look for another job, right? I mean, but because I was there with her, I was able to see what was actually going on. So, it's easier to see this in other people. I'm sure as I'm telling you this story, you can think of some friends that you have, right? Where you're like, yeah, she always thinks it's this, right? So we can see these types of things in other people, as hard as it is, much easier than we can see these things in ourselves, right? Because, when we're wearing the glasses, that's how we see things, right? So it's, it's like the water that the fish is in, right? The fish doesn't know it's in the water. We don't feel the air that we're in, right? So when we're wearing those lenses, that's our reality. The other thing too that is not helping people is we are really in a cultural moment right now where, if somebody believes something to be true, you're actually offensive if you don't sort of agree with their truth, right? That might feel like you're helping the person. It might feel like you're sympathetic. It might feel like you're being kind and caring with the person. But, sometimes people don't see the reality of the situation. And it's very difficult, right? Usually if you try to even kindly, even with love, point out to people, you're kind of misinterpreting this. You're really not seeing the reality. You're kind of looking at this through a lens that's distorting things. Usually people get very upset and defensive, right? I certainly have when people have done this to me in the past, right? So this is, again, part of the human condition, right? We get upset. We might feel threatened. We can become very offended if someone tries to help us to say, hey, you know what? I think you're not looking at this correctly. So it's very challenging for people. So as hard as it is, just as human nature being what it is, as hard as it is to sort of lovingly assist people to say, hey, your glasses are a little distorted. Right now, culturally, it's really become sort of unacceptable to have that conversation with someone because it's now considered that you're actually hurting them or harming them if you try to have this type of conversation with them. So this, unfortunately, we can have aspects of our culture that can promote our health or undermine our health. And unfortunately, this sort of cultural moment that we're in right now regarding this particular dynamic, it's not ultimately going to help people. It helps people feel a little bit better in the moment. The people say, well, I feel heard, I feel seen, etc. But you're out of alignment with reality, and that has actual consequences on you, right? Just like if you take a bougainvillea from Phoenix and you bring it up to Chicago, that bougainvillea is not going to thrive because there are certain parameters that every living thing on the planet has to live into to flourish, and we are no exception to that. So I hope this helps give you a little bit more insight into this third principle. Frankly, this is something that makes the work that I do particularly unique. Certainly the way that I approach the first principle and the second principle is also very unique compared to other natural medicine practitioners, because I understand migraines and I understand how sensitive we are when we're in that chronic migraine state. So you have to approach the first and second principle very differently with a chronic migraine sufferer because we're so easily tipped into a migraine. So even the first and second principle, what I do is pretty unique compared to other natural practitioners. But this third principle, right, it makes the work that I do for my clients to guide them to identify where those holes are, makes what I do even more unique in the industry. So I hope that helps give you a little bit more insight into what's at play within your own body and how this impacts your health, your symptoms, and then certainly your migraines. So thanks so much for joining me. And if you'd like to hear more from me, make sure that you subscribe to the content and definitely share the podcast with people that you think would benefit from it. A lot of people have told me, even though it's really geared towards migraines, my friend really likes the podcast, even though she doesn't have migraines, because it's giving her so much insight into the factors relative to our health. So please share the podcast, help us grow. Share the podcast with anyone that you think would enjoy it. So thanks so much. I will talk to you guys soon. Hi there, it's Dr. Leslie. If you're a woman having 8 or more migraine days a month, let's talk. I'll show you how to drop them to near zero in 90 days. And that's without adding more medication. In fact, you can even lower or possibly even completely wean off of your medication within 90 days. And that's without any agonizing cold turkey withdrawals. So let me tell you about one of my clients, Judy. She was nearly bedridden because she was having to take such strong medications for her migraines, and she could barely function. In fact, she had to close the doors of her small retail business, and she was feeling like a failure. She wondered every day, why was she doomed to suffer from migraines? But just like you, she found this Healing Migraines Naturally podcast, and a spark ignited. She knew that if she could just figure out why these migraines started in the first place, she could restore and recover her health again. So she booked her free consult call, and the rest is history. Now she reports months in between migraines and runs her small business full-time again. She followed the 12-week plan and got incredible results, and she's completely weaned off of all of those preventative medications that were leaving her feeling doped up and committing her to being bedridden. I have worked with women just like Judy from all over the United States overcome migraines naturally. So if you're serious about healing your migraines, then tap the link in the description and book a free consult call with me, just like Judy did. We do cap new clients monthly, so if the calendar's full, the doors are closed for now. So don't wait to reclaim the life you deserve to live. No matter how hopeless things seem now, with expert guidance, your body can heal and recover. So I look forward to chatting with you. Click the link now to schedule your call.